Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
and we are thrilled to be with you for episode 2 of season 2 in 2024. It's the second episode to drop in 2024. It's the first one we're recording together in 2024. How has your new year gone so far?
So far, not bad. It's been a week at AEA meetings in San Antonio. Absolutely amazing. The numbers were down compared to previous years, but still a lot of great people there. Still a lot of fun getting to run into people that I didn't know were going to go, getting to see my old advisor, getting to see econ ed folks. Just great week in San Antonio. This week, furiously getting ready for the start of the semester. And so by the time this drops, I will be at least have started the semester and hopefully not as stressed out as I am right now, getting ready for the start of the semester. How about you?
That's fair. It's been good. We traveled over the last of 2023, and then I've been here since. We're going to a wedding of a former student. I won't say the name on the podcast. I don't know that she wants it, but you know who it is. Former student of who's well known in Twitter land, and our whole family's going because
That's awesome.
actually babysat the kids when they were younger, so it'll be a lot of fun. And no, it's been a lot of catching up on stuff and report right, kind of dean background stuff, AACSB
Yeah.
reports, and I don't know, but it's been good. And
That is what's keeping me stressed is not the getting ready for class. It's the administrative side of my job that is just everybody's back. And so everybody wants to meet.
yeah, it can be busy. Our AACSB reaccreditation visits in September. Our chair is doing a pre-visit in April. We want to have the report done to him about a month ahead of time. So all of a sudden we're like, okay, the September visit, we want the report done in early March. At least the first draft. That's
Yeah.
pretty good shape. So, but it's fine.
It comes with the job, right?
It comes with the job. It comes with
You
the job.
agreed to do this job.
And what are you drinking today?
Well, I mean, we can explain what you're not drinking, and that way we can lead in with
Well,
mine.
so I will switch. I will say, so we talked last time about doing dry January, and I had a good discussion, and my wife and I talked. And instead of dry January, I am limiting to a drink a day. But I want to kind of do this more or less throughout the year. Now, there'll be some days where I have more than one, but then I need to have zero, the day before or the day after. I guess people have called it damp January. But one strategy for damp January or damp 2024 is if I have two beers in a night, one of them to be non-alcoholic. So I actually have a non-alcoholic Athletic Brewing Run Wild IPA, which are really pretty tasty.
Okay, I was going to ask if you've had this before because I've heard this is like a massive growth in like the beer industry of all these non-alcoholic beers. I am not sure that I've ever had a non-alcoholic beer. I may have had an O'Doul's.
Okay.
Maybe.
I bought this by mistake at a store once.
Okay.
Actually, I bought it by mistake when I made that trip to Trader Joe's. They had the individual ones, and I'd never had. And I'm like, I haven't had the Run Wild IPA.
I've never had this at the Athletic.
And it was a non-alcoholic, and I had it, and I was like, that's not really that bad. So it's not a bad strategy. If I want to have a couple beers, then one of them can be the non-alcoholic beer. So that's what.
Matt, they make this thing naturally called water that I feel like is if you're not going to drink a beer,
water doesn't taste like beer.
This is a space I don't know anything about. I think I had the O'Doul's once as a joke, but hey, you know what? It counts. We never said what we're drinking on. It's Economics Happy Hour.
It's a beer. It literally is a beer, and it is on Untapped.
Yeah. Well, so ciders are. I'm gonna have a cider.
Okay.
Next.
So what I see the top of the bottle there.
I got a Shiner on here, so I'm having Shiner Oktoberfest, their Marzen style beer. I had a 6-pack of it that I bought in the fall, and it has been sitting in the back of my fridge. I need to drink, so I need to drink these.
And you're just in Texas, so it seems appropriate to have a Shiner.
Yeah. Oktoberfest is it's cold out, and so my rule is basically these darker brown ales, Marzens, Oktoberfests. As long as it's cold out, it's okay to have it.
Yeah. Well, cheers.
Cheers. I'm also having, I shared this with Matt before we jumped on. I was just in Texas, so I spent a week in Texas, which I go crazy. I don't know if you saw me post this online. I'll say I'm really bad about this. Like really any city I go, I lean in hard on wherever I'm going. So the entire time I'm in Texas, I am basically just eating Mexican food, Tex-Mex, Buc-ee's, barbecue. My diet is just wrecked for an entire week. But I did stop at a Buc-ee's, and I did get a bunch of praline pecans, which are very
Okay.
good. And I'm starting to slowly decorate my office right here, right above my shoulder. I have a Bucky beaver bobblehead. So
I would not have known what that is, but I can see it, and very cool. Very
it's
cool.
here. I'll give you the logo if I zoom in.
Bucky.
It's that guy
Okay.
as a bobblehead.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I saw a photo where you mentioned like what you had at a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner on Twitter, and it did look pretty delicious.
Breakfast taco.
Yeah.
Whataburger for lunch. Barbecue for dinner. So I hit all three in one day.
That looked good.
I left very happy.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, you have all semester to eat right. But...
Yeah, of course. How about groceries today?
Exactly. Oh, exactly.
I got groceries that'll sit in the fridge, and I'll think about cooking.
Lots of greens, lots of greens. So, well, today, so it is January, and this is before any of the primaries, but the primary season is coming out. Is launching for the presidential elections, and a lot of state and local races will also have primaries over the next few months. We thought this would be a good time to talk a little bit about how economists think about voting. And certainly we say economists, there's, Jadrian, you mentioned the ASSA attendance was down, which still might mean 5,500 economists were there. There's whatever, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 economists in the US, that have PhDs, or the views will be pretty diverse, but we could talk a little bit about economic analysis and voting. So
by the time people are listening to this, Iowa should have just happened. Matt and I are going to make no guesses on what's going to happen in Iowa,
no.
but we'll talk about we can talk about economics of voting. We know a lot about that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole bunch of things we could start with this, but one, I've taught this a little bit in my class. I teach a little bit about economics of voting, and the first question, the question I will ask students is why, the marginal benefit, marginal cost, and I think you kind of mentioned, but why vote?
Yep.
Like, what is the purpose of voting for?
And I think at a principles level, that is that I would say that is a very real life example of something that is covered very early on in a course. So marginal benefit, marginal cost, what's the cost of doing the next activity?
Yep.
We can think about that even on a ballot, right? So, I mean, not really for the primaries, but like on a general election ballot, you might have lots of people to vote for. Yep. We can think about do you just vote for the president and leave? If you think about like investing in voting, like learning about the candidates, how deep do you go in that investment? Do you research multiple candidates, multiple races? So marginal benefit, marginal cost, one of the, I'll say, most important concepts. I think it generally is usually up there with the most important principles that we teach. So Matt, go ahead. Marginal benefit, marginal cost of voting.
Of voting. So the marginal benefit. So first of all, if we're talking about like traditional ROI, it almost never makes sense to vote.
Tell me why. Tell the people why. I know why, but tell the people why.
So the monetary, the return on voting, right? You're voting to get you have candidates you're voting for that you think would do better. Other people have candidates they're voting for, and of course, many of them disagree. Many of these people disagree with you. Your candidate may or may not win. If your candidate wins versus the other candidate, you're better off. And economists could assign a monetary value to how much you're better. We can assign monetary values to anything. Stay tuned. 2 weeks from now, our next episode will be a lot on economists assigning monetary values to things you may not have thought. So you might be better off. Let's say your presidential candidate versus the other, and you are $10,000 per year better off over the next 4 years. I think that's probably really I think that's being stunningly generous in terms of the amount it could possibly be. But let's say it's $10,000. The odds that your vote influences the election is so minusculely small that your expected value, so that $10,000 times the probability your vote influences the election, is probably the equivalent of a penny or
Yeah.
less.
Oh, probably less.
Probably less. There could be some.
Well, in a big state, right? I would say in a really, so actually this is a good chance that I'll squeeze in here. In even like a swing state, like say you take Pennsylvania, right, where you have millions of people voting, right? You might be, the chances that you are the flip might be 1 in 1 million. But if you take a state that is
Even if
like,
it could even be, on some of the close races, it could be 1 in 1,000.
well, so what I was gonna say, in some states where if you do not follow the political ideology of your state, so if you are in a blue state, but you are like a very blue state, but you're conservative, your vote like really doesn't matter.
0%.
And so I think that would be, I was gonna say that's the extreme where like, right, the probability that your vote swings it is so small.
Yep. Yeah. So it could be less. So that's the pure monetary. So then the question would be, many people do vote, and what would be the reasons for why? I mean, I assume you vote some of the time at least.
Yeah, I voted
what are the reasons?
I vote in the presidential elections.
Yeah.
I don't vote in any of the other ones.
I voted even in the last. We had a general local one. My wife was going to vote. I went and voted as well. For some local offices. What are the reasons you go vote then? You know this. You know it's not monetary ROI. So what are the reasons?
It's a civic duty, right? I feel like it feels irresponsible not to. I feel like it's part of being an American and living in the country is you go and cast your ballot. That's my big one. And realistically, it is strange in the sense that I do it for the presidential one, which largely doesn't have as big an impact as like a local election. They could do all sorts of things with like zoning laws and school boards and like sort of direct impact. Really, I should be voting in the local elections. But I don't. I don't feel that sort of civic tie to my community as I do to sort of my country.
Yeah. No, and I think what you say I think is a very legitimate reason to go vote, right? It's a sense of duty, or you feel good about it. You realize, hey, I get a hand, okay, it's probably not going to count, but I get to cast that ballot.
Yes.
People do buy lottery tickets. They go to the store, they buy lottery tickets. It's a bad monetary investment, but $2 to be able to dream that this happened. You're participating. So when you see the thing at night, you voted for somebody, right? That could have value.
You're one of those million.
Now, a lot of people get really upset, and I'm guessing there might be a couple people listening who are like, how could you even talk about voting this way? But the question I would ask anybody who would say, like, how could you be cold and calculated about voting is, if you haven't voted in the primaries or the local levels and you don't do it every time, and trust me, I know the voter records, almost nobody does it every time, you can't get upset, right? Or you be upset at yourself first. Don't be upset at us for calling out the fact that you're being hypocritical because you're not voting all of the time. When I helped somebody in a campaign once, we looked, it is
it's
very
bad.
small percentage who vote in the local, in the local, the off year primary, the off year general, the presidential primary.
Who's going to sit on the city council in this off year election in this small neighborhood?
So I would say, so those who come in and they're like, oh, how could you even talk about this? I challenge to think through this analysis for why haven't you voted in those smaller races? And I think all of it applies. It takes time and effort to study these too. We talked about just going to the polling, and that's probably not worth it. How much time are you investing in learning who these people are?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the national versus local, right? I am better informed of positions of national candidates. I wouldn't even go so far as to say a senator. I'm talking like literally just the presidential candidates.
Sure. Yep.
And most of that is because I'm on Twitter. I follow the news. I see what's happening. I read the Morning Brew. I'm keeping up with sort of policy and statements, but those are they don't really, like senatorial candidates. I don't really hear about what they're running on unless it's some sort of like high profile senator case. So in learning about it, I think it's, at least for me, I'll say it's a passive investment part of my just sort of daily consumption of the news. For the other races, I would have to like legitimately sit down and look stuff up. And it would take me a while to even figure out who's running, where I find that list of people, what their I might get the wrong. People have very common names, right? There's like a Mike Williams who might be running.
I'm guessing you can find those things somewhat
I could
easily, but
find it,
there's still a
but it would
lot of
take hours. I feel like
yeah.
if I was looking at the entire
No, I
ballot,
agree.
right?
I think it takes.
Like,
I don't think minimum of an hour if you're looking at 12 races and want some
mhm,
two or three paragraphs from each candidate.
yeah,
Um, so I think that's a good reason why a lot of people don't vote in these local or off year races. They simply don't know. Like there's a bunch of name for judges there. If you've gone
yeah,
and studied what it is, I think actually another legitimate reason somebody might not go vote is let's take the presidential and let's say the two favorites right now are Biden and Trump, right? We're not going to
mhm,
predict, but there is this. I'll mention something about predicting and gambling and these a little bit later, but those are the two favorites. If it's Biden and Trump in the general election, let's suppose that you really think that Donald Trump is better on immigration, but you think Biden is better on abortion.
mhm,
Well, you don't get to split your vote.
yeah,
Um, so you get to pick one. And it could mean like, well, I don't really care because these are the two things I care most about.
right.
Um, and one of them's going to do what I like, and the other's not going to do what they're each going to get one of them right and one of them wrong, in my opinion. Then all of a sudden, doesn't really matter. And you could go and you could vote for a third party candidate, of
Mhm.
course, um, but I think that's another legitimate reason why somebody may choose not to,
Yeah,
or at least
no, that makes
economists
sense.
might say that. But have you ever gambled on politics on Predict It?
No, but I see it come up every time, and and this goes back to I'm not well enough informed. Like,
Sure, sure.
to be fair, right? So the idea is that the whatever that market is supposed to reflect all the information that's available. It feels different. It feels different than like betting on like a sports team like that. I don't know why.
Sure.
I feel more knowledgeable about two sports teams than I do about two, which is actually sort of goofy if you think about it in the sense that I keep up with politicians, like what's happening on a day to day level, way more often than I would watch a single team play
Yeah.
a game. But I feel much more confident about betting on a game than I do on politics.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about economic marginal analysis. Economists have written, there's a famous New York Times op-ed. I think it might be Stephen Levitt, although I'm not 100%, that says "Why Vote" was literally
Mhm.
the title
Okay.
on that. And I do try to go vote most of the time, but the the economics on it is kind of interesting to think about. But economists really helped create prediction markets in
Mhm.
general. And the one that I know of now that's big and actually legal to use is predictit.org is the name of the site. What I like about these prediction sites is it is indeed, as Jadrian, as you said, it's people betting on them, betting
Yep.
on the candidates. And if people who are in the know think that have information and see a market that's well off, they should be able to go in and exploit it until the price is more or less
Mhm.
accurate. So right now it says Donald Trump is selling for 77 cents,
Okay.
which would indicate um, usually it might be just a hair inflated. You're going to lose a little bit on the juice, but
Mhm.
some maybe 75% chance he's the nominee
Hmm.
for GOP.
That makes
Nikki
sense.
Haley's at 18 cents right now for the and on the Democratic side, it's Joe Biden is at 78 cents. And if you're not looking, do you know the guess which
It's
kind of crazy they're about the same, right? In terms of the odds. You have a guess at who the number
I mean,
two is on the
well,
Democratic?
if when RFK was running, I would have picked him, but he's independent now. Um, is it Kamala?
It is not. Number two is Gavin Newsom, California governor. So
Okay,
at 13 cents.
okay.
And then I'll click on this and yeah, Harris is at 7 cents. She's in
But
third.
but you know what's so wild about this is we're looking at it now, right now, and by the time that this episode drops, the Iowa primaries would have happened. And so realistically, these numbers are about to swing very
Yep.
different than what we're talking about
Yep.
now. So you can use this as a historical fact. And when you log on, look at Predict It and
Yep.
see how much has changed in that
We are
time
recording
period.
this on January 11th, and it should drop
Yeah.
on January 18th.
I guess to be fair, they probably have a chart that shows the historical
They
price.
do have
Yeah.
the chart, but it'll be interesting to see how it all swings. But economists created these prediction markets, and they're been shown to be more accurate than polling because the people who do the wagering, of course, they can take the polls into account, but they could take any other information into account and a little bit more accurate. I know in previous, they've been used for sales predictions. Like some people have tried to put these in internally, like how much will we sell as a company? And of course, the people who are on the ground, pretty good at that. And that market is reasonably efficient. There used to be a site called InTrade that predated Predictive.
Okay.
And in my game theory class, I actually had the students go in. I didn't have them gamble on the site, but I would have them, they could take a market and because they had to throw money in, they could make a wager through the class. And there was a bankroll where I could kind of cover. They actually had one, this would be back in like 2009, 2010, on the odds that Osama bin Laden would be killed or neutralized by any particular date. Like you could literally wager on whether terrorists would be killed. So, I mean, it's kind of morbid. It's kind of interesting for a defense point of view. A debate, like they could have some, like, would there be a major terrorist attack on a particular day? Which is kind of crazy to think about. People could bet in favor of that.
Yeah.
From a defense industry point of view, the military might actually want that information. Because if that number starts to go up, they have information that seems a little bit more credible that something might happen, and they could try to figure out what's going on.
So I saw a Reddit post actually that was would it be considered insider trading if the people on the Boeing planes like started selling stocks as the door comes off? Like right, that sort of who knows what, and can you capitalize on it in these markets?
That's kind of fascinating, right? If it was during the day, or they don't even have, if they started to short Boeing the moment
that's what they said is right. The door pops off. You put your noise canceling headphones on and just calmly trade while everyone else is freaking out.
I don't know the laws on that. To me,
I think it's public knowledge, right?
Public information.
Everybody on the plane knows.
Before. Oh man, well, that's brilliant. But
thank you, Reddit. Let me give all that credit to Reddit. It was not me.
So that's another interesting part. Al Roth won a Nobel Prize for his work in market design, and I like to think of these types of prediction markets. So I teach about it in game theory because this is the design of markets, and economists have been behind these. And if you are an election aficionado or a politics aficionado, on primary nights, go to Predict It. They will know before the commentators know. Well, they'll know before the commentators will tell you on TV what's going to happen. Because you will start to see if, for example, in a particular primary, if somebody might be pulling off an upset, they might go into the day selling for, say, 10 cents a share. But then maybe by 8:40, there are these experts who are going in and they're analyzing the numbers and they're realizing, whoa, wait a second. In this county, we would have expected Trump to have this percentage, and he's only at this percentage, which really is great for whoever else. And they may start to pour money into somebody else, and it really shifts the market. So I have followed them both in 2016 and 2020 presidential elections. The prediction markets were absolutely wild to follow as it was happening. It was.
Well, so what's kind of interesting about this particular, I'll say again, presidential election, not all the other races, is normally, I think if we had recorded this, oh man, I don't even want to say in any other year. If this is recorded 4 years from now, maybe that's the best time, because I have to, just given science, I have to imagine that in 4 years from now we'll have two different candidates who are running for president.
One can give it.
We're already talking about their age now. I can't imagine, right, that 4 years from now that they're back. So let's say 4 years from now we have brand new candidates. Normally, our conversation on voting would be talking about the median voter theorem. I think, except for like the past two, I guess this one and the one maybe four before. But even if you go back to sort of Trump's first term, 2016. We still would have probably talked about the median voter theorem and this idea, and we will define what that means in just a second. We would have talked about it in 2016, But 2020, it seemed like it didn't matter. It almost seemed sort of obvious, and especially this one, it almost feels like, what's the point of even talking about the median voter theorem? We've essentially picked the two candidates. Not necessarily, but I would say just the general idea of the median voter theorem. Do you want to explain it, or do you want me to?
Either way.
Okay.
I feel like I've talked a lot, so I'll let you do this.
That's all right. Well, I think it's really fascinating. And so if you've ever, so sort of the framing of it is always that, have you ever wondered why? I guess economists love asking questions. Have you ever wondered why in the primaries, the candidates that are running for their party's nominee always seem more, what's the phrase? More
polarized to the right or to
polarized,
the left.
yeah. Right. The sort of the GOP candidates seem to be more polarized to the right. The Democratic candidates more polarized to the left. And then all of a sudden, when the general election shows up, you move to the middle and you try to capture that. Well, I'm going to give it away, that median voter. Yep. The person in the middle are those independents. And so, again, except for like maybe 2020 and especially this one, we see that normally is that when people are campaigning in their parties, they tend to take more. I don't want to say extreme, but it's the median of their parties. Yep. So they're they take everybody on the right. You try to be in the middle of all the people on the right, but then when you're running in the general election, you sort of scoot over to the left a little bit so that you can capture all of those other people. Did I kind of summarize?
I think so. I mean,
good enough way.
Backing away from the primary system, right? If you just had 101 voters, whatever, it's the 50, and you rank them from politically, let's say it's a line, right? We know it's not a line. There's a bunch of issues, but somebody from most on the left to most on the right, there would be a voter number 51 who is right in the median, and half of them are more to the right politically and half are more to the left. That person has a ton of power.
Yes.
First, because everybody will want to capture the middle, knowing the left and the right will kind of go to one side or the other.
And the idea is that you vote for who's closest to you. That's another part of that story.
And then if in the Republican primary, it's going to be mostly those, about the approximate half of the people on the right, and the Democratic, it'll be on the left. So the Republican side, the median candidate might be targeting voter number 75 if we're going one is to the left and 75 is to the right. And on the Democratic side, it's voter number 25 instead of going for voter number 51.
Yeah. And so what's kind of interesting, I think, is so I've watched all the I'm going to say I've watched all of them. I think I've come pretty close. If I haven't watched all of the Republican primary, the debates, I've come really close.
Bless you. I've watched 0 minutes, and I
enjoy watching. I like watching primaries. I don't like watching. Watching the presidential debates last time I hated it because they were just yelling at each other. So like it just. I would turn it off because I'm like, please, I actually want to hear what you're saying, right? Like that was always my thing is I'm trying to be an informed voter. I would like to hear. So I've watched the Republican ones. Again, I want to know. And you can sort of see it, right? You can sort of, and maybe you've seen it in sort of headlines that have come out after each one, that during the Republican primaries, they tend to take fairly strong, I would say incredibly strong conservative stances that realistically would not be popular in a general election. So I think of things like there's a couple candidates who talk about like invading Mexico to shore up the border. That works really well in a primary group. You can't sell that message. I don't think you can sell that message to the whole country. That's not an electable issue. But it's sort of interesting to see it in the primaries, except this year the leading candidate is not participating in those debates. So you don't get to sort of hear the normal, natural progression of ideas that happen. So I like to listen. I like to listen to them. I wish there was a Democratic debate. I would listen to that. But there's not.
Yeah, who knows? Apparently there's a 20+% chance it's not Biden. That to me it's striking.
That's somebody voting on his death. That's what that is. Those are
the
votes
people who are voting against that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's
what it is.
If you think there's or death or incapacitation,
right? I think if he's old enough that maybe something happens, and then who's the next person.
But if you want to do that, right? If you think that there's a reason, if you think it's a better than 1 in 3 shot, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, actually 20, you could risk 22 cents to win $1.
Right.
And so there's that's out there. If
But
you think,
given,
oh yeah, it's
given their
50.
ages, right?
What?
Given their ages,
Yeah,
those
it's kind
I,
of crazy.
I'm going to say they're not bad bets in the sense that they're both over 80, and so there's I mean, there's plenty of people who live into their 90s, and there's some that live into their hundreds. But
Yeah, I think life expectation once you hit 80 is, you know, I
and the
don't. I mean, the odds that you get
yeah.
death or incapacitation in the next 9 months is pretty low.
Well,
Well, at
actually,
least death,
this is
incapacitation. I'm not sure.
I have a really interesting. This might be interesting for our listeners of a did you know sort of thing. I have always wondered this, Matt. Do you know what? So whenever so I'm going to flash forward to the conventions when they have picked their nominee, when they actually have decided who they want. Do you know what happens? Say like November 2nd. Let's go. Not voting day. I don't know what day we vote on. I hope it's not November 2nd. I'm guessing it's probably like the third of the. Let's say October 30th. Let's go into October, so I know it's definitely not voting day. What do you know what happens if one of the candidates were to die before the election?
If it's like right before it's November 5th. Actually, I'm not 100%. I would assume the vote goes on and that person's vice president would be elected president, but I don't know.
No, that's not what happens.
Okay.
That's so I don't remember why I learned it. I think somebody had brought up, I think I'd read about it in the sense of, again, talking about Biden and Trump's age. They had talked about sort of what happens before. So when you are casting your ballot, you are casting it for the party, not for the person. Yep. And so the party can then go back and then renominate somebody to fill in that spot.
Okay, I remember that happening in a couple Senate races where somebody died, like in Minnesota, Paul Wellstone died a week or so, 10 days before, and I think all the ballots had been printed. So
exactly, yeah, they can't print a new one, they can't find a new person.
And so the Democratic Party said this will be our person instead.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So we I think so voting, hopefully this was informative for the listeners, right? I mean, a few different areas where economics applies, the betting markets, the idea of marginal analysis, the median voter theorem. But if you have anything you think we missed, please leave it in the comments.
Well, we missed talking about the free rider problem, but it goes back to the marginal benefit, marginal cost. Why don't we have great turnout at these events? Partly, so some of it is the cost, some of it's marginal benefit, marginal cost, but the other part of it too is because the cost is sort of in front of our face. It's a real cost that we have to exhibit, and the benefit probabilistically seems pretty low. If I feel comfortable that I'm going to get the outcome that I want without having to put in effort, I have an incentive to free ride. And so I don't need to go participate. I'm going to get what I want. Yeah. That's not necessarily true in a swing state, but it goes back to that sort of strong red, strong blue state. If you live in a state that is strongly tied to your preferences, why do I need to vote? It's going to be, I know who it's going to be.
And I have heard kind of relate, not quite like that, related. Some people, one argument people would say about the voting, but if everybody had this attitude that you don't need to vote, then what would happen? Well, there's an equilibrium. If a lot of people have that attitude, then all of a sudden your vote is worth doing. Right? If all of society thought, oh, it's not worth my time, and you were the only person to vote, well, yeah, your expected benefits way higher. You're a dictator. You get to choose what happens. But as more people, if it's far fewer, in some ways, I think it's a self-correcting mechanism.
Yeah.
If too few people go, then all of a sudden your vote is way more important. If too many, that's probably the wrong phrasing. But if 100% of the population goes, it's less likely your vote is the swing vote.
Yeah. So I would say that's the only concept we didn't talk about, but I would say we skirted around it. We talked about, why don't people vote? Part of that is just they're free riding. They're going to get an outcome that, and maybe it's the outcome, like you said, Matt, where I like the policies of one, I like the policies of others. Why waste my time? I'll be half happy, regardless of who I pick.
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting. So hopefully if you're listening and you're like, oh, come on, how could you guys have forgotten this? Leave a comment for us. If it's a big enough thing, right? The primary season goes on long enough, maybe we'll do a different episode on it.
Hey, you know what? We got to come back in November, so it gives us another. We can always talk about it again.
We could talk about it again. Any pop culture that you'd like to
Oh
discuss?
man, I did not prepare pop culture, but let me hit the econ media library real quick.
Yeah, I didn't.
Do
I,
you?
I certainly didn't think about it for voting today, and
So,
especially since I think on a recent one I gave a voting one. So, but
so I do know. Before I'm going to search and see if I got anything off the top of my head. There are some scenes from Superstore. They had an episode about voting. It's set in, we talked about
yeah,
Superstore before, sort of like The Office meets Walmart. They had an episode about voting and sort of this like marginal benefit, marginal cost, should we vote, those sorts of concepts kind of weave their way through. But what was really interesting sort of in that particular episode is there's a big chunk of essentially corporations encouraging employees to vote a certain way, and the employees were sort of, they would look up who it was, and they're like, why is our company telling us to vote for this? And then other people are like, yeah, because that person's anti-union. Like, and so there's this nice sort of rent seeking. Rent seeking is maybe not the right word for this one, but sort of this space of
sure.
incentives are maybe not aligned between employees and workers.
And employers. That's an
Yeah.
interesting one. I'll give one that's not on. It's not on voting, but it's on a name we mentioned today. We talked about markets and Al Roth a little
Okay.
bit, and I've started over break. I have a little bit more time, so I've been preparing some videos. As Curb Your Enthusiasm has its
Okay.
last season, I'm going to be dropping weekly episodes on
Yeah.
lessons, and there's one called Lewis Needs a Kidney,
Hmm.
and it's about Larry David's friend, and he needs a kidney. But it's a good. It's a lot like kidneys. You can't buy or sell a kidney. It's illegal in the U.S. to do that. So how do they get exchanged? They get exchanged through what are called matching markets, and these are the types of markets that Al Roth really won his Nobel Prize for. The idea of
Hmm.
kind of market design, creating markets. The idea that you may know somebody who needs a kidney, but you're not a match, and but somebody else somewhere else in the country may need the kidney you have, and they have a friend who, and I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but so the Lewis needs a kidney, Al Roth, certainly not voting, but I thought, yeah, it ties in a little bit here.
Well, I'll give you a book recommendation since you brought up Al Roth and his matching markets. I don't know if you've read it, but he did write a popular press book called Who Gets What and Why. And so it talks about matching markets. And I mean, obviously, there's a big section on the kidney exchange
Yeah.
because he did so much work in that space. But it was a great book. I really liked it.
So for pop culture, I think you might have done a video on this, but or not a video, but a Substack post. One other, the bonus pop culture. So we're in 2024 now. This is the first one we're recording in 2024. What was your favorite book, econ or non-econ, of 2023?
Okay. I know what I picked as my favorite book. And this is, I will say, so when I make my favorite book list, I get very particular because, right, like I'm basically saying like this is my number one book of the year. And so I get very nervous in terms of like the ranking and the order of it. But I did pick an econ book as my number one book. When I read it, just absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And I am actually mad that you asked me this because I feel like I'm gonna butcher his last name and I'm gonna feel so bad because he is the nicest guy. It's by Eric Ongner. I believe he's Swedish. He's either Swedish or he's Danish. I'm going to say Swedish, and I hope I'm not wrong on this. It's called How Economics Can Save the World: Simple Ideas to Solve Our Biggest Problems. Absolutely loved it. I thought it was really great. Talked about all sorts of, I would say, those sort of big problems that we always kind of pitch in economics. You can use economics to save kids in the hospital. You can use it for education. But it was just sort of really neat examples of all the. So he talks actually about the kidney exchanges in there, about how economics has been used to help people move organs around and help save lives in kidney exchanges. So it's actually that book that is how I learned about Al Roth's book. I had actually never read it before, and Al Roth's book is like a decade old, but I learned about it from How Economics Saved the World. So I always think about it in the sense of if a book leads me to another book, that's usually a sign it's a pretty good book.
That's a good sign. That's a very good sign.
What about you?
It's tough to know what a best book is. I really enjoy Vince Flynn's books, and he comes up with one every year, so I liked that. But in terms of one that's different, I'll go with the non-econ one.
Okay.
there were some econ ones that I liked as well, but there's a book called A Gentleman in Moscow, and it did not come out in 2022.
No, but I think I've read this.
Um, that was a big thing. I actually had the hardcover, and it was absolutely so. It's Amar Tolls is the name of the author. Just fascinating story, and there is a bit of economics in there because it's around the time of the Russian Revolution, approximately a century ago. And I mean, I'm not giving much away here because this all happens in the first 4 pages. But a person's essentially condemned to house arrest in this particular hotel in Moscow.
Okay.
And it's just the weird adventures that he gets within the hotel. So I think that was the best, and there's certainly a fair amount of econ within it. In
Right.
terms of, the systems that are being set up, the Communist Party coming into power and how they went about things, because they held some of the meetings at the hotel. So I think that was probably, I think I'll go ahead and say that as my number one book, but it is not a 2022 book. It's just
No,
and
I haven't read it. I have seen it so many times, and my guess is it's a pretty thick book according to
it is a thick book. I had it on a cruise ship, which is perfect because I had no Wi-Fi. And so, then you just bring the book and you get a lot of practice.
No, I think I've seen it a lot, and I've wanted to read it. So
I'd recommend it. I read several that you had recommended throughout the year, like the 50 Inventions. I read Rockonomics.
What do you think about the 50 Invention?
The 50 Inventions that changed the world. Oh, I thought it was great.
Yeah,
fantastic.
It's fast. I really those are the sort of fast reads because each one's only like 3 or 4 pages.
So yeah, I read several of the books that I did really enjoy were your recommendations. So there was good stuff. So
yes. I read a lot. I'm glad to hear that they actually were good recommendations and that you weren't disappointed with one of them.
I was not disappointed at all.
Good.
Well, thank you to everybody for listening. If you could give a 5-star review if you haven't already, and leave a comment, we would appreciate that. I know on personal, so this is the first one we've recorded since 2023.
Yes.
This is
physically recorded since
listeners have sent one, but we recorded we got news of Spotify, like 88 people on Spotify had us in their top 10 podcasts for the year. And for being year one, I was just stunned because that's just one thing. I got that. I had a rough week the week before Christmas, and that was just so like happy and cheerful. Like it was such cool news. It really means a lot. Everybody who listens. So thank you to everybody for supporting the show. And Jadrian, any final words? How was your cider?
I'm not having cider. The cider's my next drink. Oktoberfest.
How's the Oktoberfest?
Delicious. I love it. I love Oktoberfest.
Mine, the non-alcoholic IPA is gone. So, but until next time, Jadrian.
Awesome. Cheers, Matt.